EM thinks her kids should play with my $1,500 PC. Edit. My mum did stand up for me at the end, many comments saying she should, and she had to buy me a $50 keyboard. Those crotch goblins ain't coming back for a while since my parents are mad with them. Info. I recently bought this PC that cost about $1,500 without counting the monitors and other stuff, and I was very delicate with it. My grandma's birthday was approaching, and since my family and my grandma live in the same city, all the other family members traveled to visit. I love my cousin except one group. These kids are spoiled, their mother doesn't care about them, so they developed into bratty and annoying kids. One is 11, the oldest, and she is the least annoying. But she doesn't care about what other people think and always does what she wants. The middle kid is about 8 and he is a crybaby. If we don't let him see our phones or let him play with them, he goes to cry to his or my parents. And the third one, about 4-5, is always making fun and picking on the middle kid. He also breaks many toys and is a snitch himself. Onto the story. I was chilling in my house playing some CS when I hear the door. I hoped it was the good cousins, but it was the trio. In the beginning, we were in the living room talking about and telling stories. But after a while, they went deeper in the house, my room. First, they annoyed my little bro with his Nintendo Switch. After a while though, they got bored and went into my room. The first to walk in was the small kid. He immediately sat on my best seat that is next to my desk and started watching me play. He asked to play, but I said no as it was too hard for him and he would die. Then the middle kid walked in. The old one stayed talking with the parents, and they started arguing over who was going to play first. After a couple of matches they started saying it was their turn, and when I refused they started picking on each other for fun. At one point the young one punched the big one, who fell into my PC's tower and knocked it over. It was very heavy. They got scared and went to tell their parents. The PC was fine, not even a scratch. But then they made up a story about me picking on them and not letting them play and had to let them play. The mother screamed at me in front of my parents and told me if I made babies sad again she would make sure my computer disappears. At one point the small kid was playing and got so mad after dying he punched my keyboard, knocking a piece off. This was a $30 keyboard, so got mad. And the mother told me off for being a snitch when I told my parents. They eventually left and I now have to play with a keyboard with a key sunk lower than the rest. It's mechanical, so they higher than normal keyboards. I told my mum to buy a lock for my room and she agreed, so next time they ain't even coming in. Stepmother tried to kidnap me and my sister for Christmas. This happened in 2009, when I was 15 and my sister was 11. I honestly don't remember it well. I had to call my mother to fill me in on some details, and it helped a little. My parents got divorced when I was 10. My mother got primary custody, but we stayed with my father for about 3 days a week, sometimes more. They took turns celebrating the holidays with us. We'd spend them with one parent in 1 year, and with the other one the next. In March 2009, my father and his then-girlfriend Molly broke up after he confessed to cheating with the woman that eventually became SM. Years later, I found out that affair had been going on for almost 2 years by the time he told Molly. He introduced SM to us in May, on my birthday, actually immediately announced their engagement. From that moment, she started trying to force us all to be a happy blended family, which usually meant forcing us to do everything she, or sometimes my stepbrother, wanted, and pretending my mum wasn't in the picture. SM and my dad started pushing her to leave us with them a lot more often than my parents had previously agreed, but she thankfully wouldn't budge. We started getting ready for the holidays in November, and SM started talking about a ski resort, hotel? I don't know, it was 14 years ago, that she wanted to visit with us. It was a 3-hour car drive from where we lived and was clearly more suited for couples, younger children or the elderly. Neither me or my sister actually wanted to go, but before we could say that, SM asked us when we'd be done with school so that she could book it for a 2-week trip during our winter break. I was happy to be the one to break it to her. We'd spent Christmas and New Year's Day with my father and Molly the year before, so it was my mom's turn to have us. My father and SM called my mother dozens of times to try to convince her to let them take us, insisting that SM was excited to spend Christmas with us and that the previous year's holidays didn't count because we'd spent them with Molly. My mum said no, as she'd already made plans, and the subject was dropped for a few weeks. Then, on our last day of school before winter break, SM picked me and my sister up from our schools. That was fine, we were supposed to spend a couple days with my father before the holidays. What wasn't fine was that the moment we got into her car, SM said, "We're going to the ski resort." Surprise! She proceeded to tell us that they'd already packed our bags for us, and Dad would meet us there. I asked if my mum knew about this, and she said, "Sure," but I knew that was a lie. I also didn't believe her when she said we'd only be there for a couple of days and would be back before Christmas. I figured they'd booked the 2-week stay they wanted and would probably guilt-trip us both into staying once their couple of days were up. I was terrified. I didn't have a phone. My mum thought I was still too young to have one, didn't trust SM, and I could see my sister was even more scared. I told SM we didn't want to go. She said, "Fine. Let's just pick stepbrother up from school." We picked him up from school. SM said, "Okay, now let's go to the resort." I said, again, that we didn't want to go. She said, "Fine. Let's just find a gas station and fill up." That pattern repeated itself about 6 times over the next hour. Every time I said we didn't want to go, SM would make up an excuse and pretend to forget my plea. As we were about to leave town, my dad called SM. I heard them fight for a few minutes about something, and then she hung up. Stepbrother asked her what happened, but she didn't answer. Then, she said, "I'm taking you kids to your mom's." She turned the car around and took us home. When we got there, my mum pulled us out of the car and screamed at SM to leave, which she did. My mum was hugging us and bawling as if she hadn't seen us in years. She didn't tell me the full story until a few days later. Basically, my mum called my dad in a panic because he'd never told her we'd gotten home, which he always did whenever he picked us up from school. He was hoping she wouldn't call until we were already at the resort. My father knew that lying would do more harm than good, so he told her their plans. He tried to spin it around as something my sister wanted, but my mother didn't buy it. She told him that if SM didn't take us back to her place, she'd call the police. My father and SM took my stepbrother to the resort. For a few months after, they bragged about all the fun they had, and all the things me and my sister had missed. Stepbrother later confided in me that he actually hated it. He barely saw his mum while they were there, and he spent Christmas mostly alone in their room. SM called us both selfish for trying to ruin their holidays. My sister actually felt guilty for a while, and I had to reassure her. My mum didn't call the cops or pressed charges. At the time, she didn't know if what SM did would qualify as a crime, or if they'd actually help. She also feared that would ruin our relationship with my father, with whom she was still trying to stay on amicable terms. Years later, she told me she regretted not calling anyone. And that's the story of how I got my first phone. For some reason, I really hate this story. So much that I avoid talking about it. This text was actually on my draft for almost a week. It's far from the worst thing SM has ever done, but it still p-word me off. I admit that writing it all down did help a little, though.